really personal to you, and you're gonna present us the evolution of the birth and the relationship with one of your sons. So, if you want to introduce us to this topic and what is relevant, like to know to understand better the entire story.
Yeah, so I'm going to be sharing a little bit of the journey with my son. His name is Vasco, and he was my firstborn. And as I said, his discovery was not good, and there was a massive change in my relational field with my partner, in order to adapt to the birth of a baby. But and then the pregnancy was pretty happy, you know, and smooth and amazing. I was super happy and glad, and dad became super happy and glad and all of that. But towards the end of the pregnancy, he was born at 41 weeks and 6 days. So you can imagine he wanted to be inside. No wonder why he didn't want to come out, can't blame him for that. Um, I of course, I had gestational diabetes, which is already a red flag, as you know. So my pregnancy and my birth, I didn't have this awareness I have now. So I followed the book. It was pretty much by the book. Very technocratic. My not my preparation for birth actually, because it was a very good, like the universe came together in order to do this to me. It was like the universe speaking already, because it put in my way in the preparation for my birth. I was already seeing a therapist, right? I was already seeing a therapist for a while before, even before becoming pregnant. And this therapist was one of Carlton's students, my therapist, like 15 years ago
Mhm.
or whatever. She was one of Carlton's students. So when Carlton came to Portugal and did his foundational course live, he went to Austria, he went to all sorts of countries. One of the countries was Portugal, and my therapist was one of his students. And there was another one of his students, a nurse who was already older, and she had this preparation for pregnancy. And my therapist told me when I got pregnant, do you want to see her? She's amazing. She's really cool. And she was already also one of the colleagues, the course colleagues of my therapist. And I went to see her, and she was like incredible, amazing. That was the only thing not inside, not by the book. Well, it was by the book because preparation for pregnancy was pretty like standard, but she shared things that already stayed. Like not directly called it pre and perinatal psychology, but there was some difference in perspective and approach that I thought, that's really interesting. And I kept that in mind as well. And then because of the gestational diabetes and because he was so late, you know, there was all sorts of red flags from the doctors, da-da-da. And I went to the hospital when the waters broke. Waters breaking, another red flag. So I went to the hospital, and everything was by the book then. And not very kind, not very gentle, made to be in bed, any movements at all. And we ended up Pitocin for hours on end. Pitocin, a lot of Pitocin I had, epidural. So I had everything that now I believe babies shouldn't have, or unless they should have, unless, of course, they should have if there is a real threat to the baby and the mother. And of course, interventions are amazing in that sense, not if there's not a real emergency. So we ended up going into surgery, and we had a cesarean, and they put me to sleep without asking me or informing me. So in 1 minute I was awake and crying and shouting. I was really stressed. The other minute I was asleep, and when I woke up, my baby was born, and I didn't see him. I didn't know where he was. And it was pretty shocking for both of us to go through that, He was gone, and I started screaming again, of course. It was pretty harsh. good thing is that once I left the room to go into surgery, guess who was on the other side of the door? I don't know how she got into the hospital. She was a nurse, so she knew people. That was Louisa, this person who did our preparation for birth. And I was like, oh, it was like seeing mother, which I don't have a relationship with my mother, but, it was like seeing mother with a big M, like, Louisa, please, they're taking me to surgery. I don't want this. And she really reassured me, it's going to be okay. Sometimes it's necessary. Don't worry now, just go with it, don't worry. When I left the room, the surgery room, because I had to be on my own. Back then in Portugal, they still didn't allow for the partner to be there, so I was completely alone. When I left, that was Luisa with my partner. She was all the way with him and nurturing him and being a doula. She wasn't a doula, but she was being a doula. And I thought, oh my God, this person is so special. It's just amazing. And then when she visited us postpartum to do like the tests and to take the stitches, we still took the stitches back then, and she, before she did the intervention on Vasco's foot, to take a little bit of blood, the heel prick test that they do. She explained to him, she took him and he said, Louise is going to do this. It's going to hurt a little bit. Here's where I'm going to do it. And she just touched the area where she was going to prick. Here's where I'm going to do this. It's going to hurt a little bit, but I will be here all the time. I'll be here with you, She did it. He kind of cried a little, just a tiny squeak. And then she said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm here. I know it hurt. I'm sorry. And I was just observing and I was like, oh, I want to be that person when I grow up, kind of thing, I want to be that person. It was so emotional to see her treating him like that. I've never seen anything like that, And I swear to you, I said, I want to be that. I want to be that. And from then on, I never gave up to become who she was showing me it was possible to be with babies. And for a baby who had gone through all the ordeals he has gone, it was just beautiful to see somebody be like that with him, beautiful. And so this was our kind of very, very early beginning. And so, yeah, I have the presentation ready for you if you want to start. Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
I can talk a little bit about what our journey from then on, how our journey has been and what he has shown. You were talking, and I forgot about that part. You were talking about the differences, kind of the birth, being born in different ways, of course, is completely different because it's a different experience, Is it the same being born with an awake mother who grabs you and puts you on her breast? Is it the same to be born from a body that's your world to another constellation and you don't even know where she is? You can't hear her voice, you can't feel her body, other hands, other kind of feelings, and the air is cold and the lights are bright and you're being taken away to somewhere where she's not. It can't be the same, Is it the same kind of going through the ordeal of following the biological drive? Okay, I'm feeling the contractions, I'm going with it, it hurts, yes, it hurts, so I'm going this way, and then I turn that way because there's a bone there, but I can do it, it's hard, but I can do it. And then slowly you traverse that tunnel and you come out and you find your mother. Oh my God, is this the same as suddenly being born in a very shocking and sudden way through the hands of other people? It can't be the same, Not saying it's bad or worse or bad, because there are vaginal births that, of course, are really harsh for the babies. Bear in mind, being born vaginally is biologically natural. It's what the babies biologically expect, what the organism is expecting to happen. It's all good, which doesn't mean it's not hard, Does not mean it's not hard for the baby. But being born by C-section is a double whammy. Not only you not follow the biological drive and you miss on that ending of the sequence and all the hormonal shifts that come through that, but you are born to a harsh world who treats you in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated as an adult, you know? So it's a double whammy, not following the biological drive and being born to a place who says, this is not a safe place to be born into. And now you need to work with that if you want to. And luckily, I think prenatal psychology, whether, there are a lot of people doing it or believing in it or not, it's the only approach, baby therapy, the only approach to healing pre and perinatal issues the babies might experience. It's the only one. That's why nobody does it, only us, because there is nothing out there that actually helps babies. Well, there is the psychoanalytic approach, parent-infant psychotherapy. But parent-infant psychotherapy addresses the emotional world of the parents and the baby, the relational field perhaps, but not the embryological part, not the prenatal early part in connection with what's happening now and then, So there's nothing out there that helps babies the way we do. I do strongly believe in that. Yeah, so when you're ready, I can share my screen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all really emotional for me, and yeah, can't wait to see more.
Okay, let's see if this works. Now, okay, I'll present it there because my mouse. Okay, let's see. Okay. Now I can see the screen, but I cannot see you. Where are you? Good. Okay, I'll just start presenting. But I have to share the screen first, right? Oh God. Sorry, me. I'm trying to recover my mouse. I think I got it now. Okay, so let me see if I can share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Okay. I will share with sound just in case we need to share some videos. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Am I sharing?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just, okay. So maybe I'll start with this slide here. If it changes, yes. So this is Vasco. This was the first photo that was taken, guess by who? By this wonderful person, Luisa. She took our first photo. And you can see him here. You think, oh, what a kind of calm state he's in, so tranquil, so calm and all of that. But I see it differently now, I think he was depleted and shut down, and he needed to, just turn off the plugs and just rest, because it had been so harsh for him, his birth. Bear in mind, this is something that I didn't mention before. When we mention Pitocin and an epidural, we think about it as not having an impact for the babies. But again, for example, when we hear about a baby being born by C-section or by vaginal birth, whatever the birth was, is it the same being born without Pitocin than with Pitocin, with or without epidural? Of course not. It's not the same. And I'll share, for example, in regards to Pitocin, the difference of using Pitocin or not using Pitocin is that when you have natural contractions that are driven by natural oxytocin, what you have is sorry, there was a motorcycle passing by, I just paused so you could hear me. What you have with natural Pitocin, with natural oxytocin, is that the contractions start slow, and with a lower in intensity, and then more paced. And as time goes by, they get stronger and more intense, and they are closer together. And this means that the baby is navigating your pelvic space, your pelvis, and navigating your bones. It's not all cushioning there. The babies navigate bones and they bump into them, and they have to wait until there's a room within contractions, in middle of contractions, where they can just turn their faces into a space that's a little bit more, that has more room for them to descend. Okay. And that's why labors are longer. Usually they are longer because babies need time in order to navigate these centimeters. It's very millimeters sometimes, and sometimes they need to rest in between the contractions or in between the descent, because there are places during the descent that are harder than others, right? And than other stages within the navigation of the pelvis. And so natural oxytocin allows for the baby to adapt to this growing intensity until birth happens. Pitocin, however, what it does, that's why mothers struggle so much with Pitocin, and they say the contractions are really hard, and usually they ask for epidural. That was my case, because it's incredibly painful. The contractions are always like that and always close together. It's like hammering the baby for hours on end, Is the baby feeling that hammering? Of course the baby's feeling that hammering. Is it the same navigating bones with at the same time being hammered by Pitocin contractions or by naturally driven oxytocin contractions? Of course not. It's not the same. My baby was hammered by Pitocin. And you can see his forehead. You can see his right cheek, how difficult this was for him. And you can also see how the moment where he was extracted during the cesarean, where he got stuck, was right on his eye level, right here, right here. That was when he was extracted during the cesarean. You see his nose is so symmetrical, his mouth is perfect, everything else is so perfect. But he was being hammered right here. And his cheek during the extraction, I think it had an impact of some sorts when he was extracted. Some babies born by cesarean are extracted with a forceps, for example. Because of their position, depending on their position and how they can be extracted. It's not like really easy to extract or to remove or to bring out a baby who's big from a small body, from a small pelvis where they got stuck. Sometimes they have to do some interventions on that. And of course, that is hard for the baby. That is experience that the babies have that they take with them, So this was our beginning. And then we had an epidural. And when an epidural happens, is like you lose the mother's body. Not only are you being hammered, but you don't feel the mother's body anymore because it gets numb. It's like she's not there anymore. And then you are born to a sleep mother taken away by other people. Now, tell me that this is not experience that stays ingrained in a baby's, in a child, in an adult's memory, because I can't believe it. I won't take it, it's impossible. And so this was how Vasco, sadly, and I started. This was how he entered the world. And so our story continues. Now, how was Vasco during babyhood? He had very few crying spells, like he didn't have colic. He had a few crying spells that were really intense. And I remember a particular one when he was crying out of implicit memory. I recognize it now. I didn't recognize it then. And I was crying too. And now I know, remembering what was happening then, that we were both crying from implicit memory. And that's why I couldn't help him. And my partner had to come in and save the situation. You know, we were both crying out of our own implicit memory. I couldn't stand his pain. Oh, this is oh, I did this on purpose. Okay, it's blurred. I think I did this to share the PDF. Anyway, it's okay, I think. And so he had very few crying spells, but he did have a couple of implicit memory crying, but he had other expressions. So throughout time, I noticed that his tolerance to pain was higher than the rest of the children, for example. So his nervous system was already telling me something about his coping mechanisms that I couldn't recognize until I was observing actively and intentionally. One of them was this high tolerance to pain, was so resistant, you know, he would bump his head, and he had a significant vision loss, right? He still, of course, still has. And so there was a lot of sensory issues that I didn't recognize then. Again, I recognize it only later. Sensory integration issues that was also due to his vision, but then due to his birth trauma and prenatal trauma as well, which also can activate or deactivate the integration of primitive reflexes, which has all sorts of consequences to then, you know, crawling, walking, negotiating space, knowing, negotiating space, relational interactions, anxiety, you know, ADHD. Now it's all over the place, but I dislike those labels, because for me it's like it's anxiety, you know, it's anxiety that comes from somewhere, and we need to support that anxiety. But he had something that I also, that was for me one of the most scaring things, was when he had breath holding attacks. So when he had like he would cry, and the crying would be super intense, like a high pitched cry immediately, because he would bump his head or something like that. This happened once a month, more or less, and he would faint. So he would curl and get purple, and he would curl his limbs like a fit. He would have a fit and he would faint. And this was when he was 8 months old. Can you imagine this happening with a baby, with your baby at 8 months old? I was like, oh my God, you know. All pediatricians told me, I changed pediatrician because of that. And again, I had the same reply, you know, this is normal. Some babies experience that, and this will go away. They will grow out of it. And he did, you know, he did stop having these fainting spells, but it turned into something else, you know. It turned into something that was already there. It was just expressed in a different way. His nervous system was very reactive all the time, you know, very reactive, very reactive. So it was all about his nervous system having this kind of duality. Either I need to shut down and faint, you know, or I'm like really reactive to my environment. You know, he had this duality, still has, you know, but, you know, more and more integrated as time goes by. Very reactive child, always on, always on, always on, and like aggression out there. And then there were moments where he needed just to shut down completely. And I can relate that to his birth, of course, you know, to his prenatal life and to his birth, like the shock after shock after shock, and the need to kind of collapse in order to be able to survive the experience. It was a surviving mechanism, and he brings that with him. When you recognize it, you can do something about it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's fast, but it's possible. And if you recognize it, you can always do something about it throughout their lives, since they are little ones. He didn't have that luck because I wasn't aware of this. I did that with his brother, but I didn't do that with him. And his brother, it's like, oh my God, the pace in which the transformation happens when you are alert to these things, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. And you think, oh, sometimes you think, was it because of that? Or, maybe it would happen anyway. And then I think, I don't even want to know, I don't even want to know if I didn't do that, if it would be in a different, what if it wasn't? And if he would be impaired in some way because I didn't do because I doubted myself about what I needed to be doing. I don't even want to know, even if it wasn't the main reason, or it was definitely one of the reasons, but even if it wasn't the main reason, I don't even want to know. I did it and I'm glad I did, that kind of thing. And so what happened then to him? Of course, breastfeeding. He didn't like the sling. He didn't like to be trapped, He was born with a circadian, like an immature circadian rhythm, but most babies actually are born like that. But, because he had this duality, I noticed, for example, it happened more to him than to his brother, who was vaginally born. It was more intense, this confusion about day and night with him than it was with his brother. Breastfeeding difficulties, months to latch properly, months. So now I think about his implantation, how it would have been. However, he left the breast just like that. One day he decided, I don't want it anymore. He told me, Mommy, I don't want it, around 2 years of age. And I was destroyed, of course. I was completely destroyed with this decision of his, but I respected it, and that's that. But he took months to latch properly. It was so hard. Then he was exclusively breastfed for a while, and everything went perfect until he was 2 years. The high threshold to pain, I mentioned that. And of course, this is something that happens very, very frequently. This is probably the consequence that you'll see more being talked about from C-section babies, the frequent respiratory infections. So the compromised immune systems tend to be babies, not all of them, most of them, I would say, that have the health more compromised, and they have more viral reactivity, they have more respiratory infections, they tend to be sick more often than actually vaginally born babies. And knowing this, of course, you can do something about it, like trying homeopathy, or, there's not a lot, well, there are a lot of now recent therapies, like what's it called, fecal transfusion. Have you heard about? Do you know when babies are born by C-section that you can do like the fecal, is that what the name?
Yeah.
Fecal swab?
Yeah.
Where they take like fecal matter from the mother and they put it on the baby's skin so that they don't miss on that immune that immunity that comes from going through the birth canal and the proximity to the anus. The anus and the vaginal area have kind of microbes that are very good for babies to develop their immune system. Vaginally born babies have that, C-section babies do not. And so you can ask for a swab right after they are born, or you can do like a transfusion, a fecal transfusion. It's not this exact name, but I know they are doing that with Cezarian born babies and also with autistic children, and with very good results, actually, with very good results, I've heard. So that's something that it's also possible. And so, shall I stop a little to see if you have some questions, or do you want me to?
Yeah, for now, everything is fine. We can continue.
Now, when we go to toddlerhood, this was babyhood. If we go to toddlerhood, what was I noticing? This was a very curious, fun full of energy, strong personality, strong temperament. I mean, nobody not noticed he was there, basically. Was one of these children who, entered a room and would speak to everybody, would never stop moving around, would make friends easily. This was my son, right? Saying no was always an issue. He has issues with authority until today, issues with authority across the board. Hearing it's not a possibility. Will argue with you, and you will find all sorts of arguments to prove himself that he's right, or that he wants you to hear his point of view, his perspective, so you won't take no for an answer. He was also obsessed with dinosaurs, the fearless ones, the T-Rex. And now, on a side note, my younger son was also obsessed with dinosaurs, but guess what his favorite dinosaur was for a while? I don't know if you know about dinosaurs. I have a master's in dinosaurs because of my children, but Vasco was all about the T-Rex, and the Allosaurus, the meat eaters and the aggressive ones. Gilles was vaginally born with Ventus. He was Ventus born. He was extracted. His favorite dinosaur is called Pachycephalosaurus. Pachycephalosaurus is, you Google it after this. Pachycephalosaurus is a dinosaur, not a meat eater, I don't think, but he has like a stone on his head. Yeah, so he has a stone on his head, and he has like little spikes, and he kind of protects himself with his head. He bumps into the other dinosaurs because he has such a strong stone head. And this was my Gilles' favorite dinosaur. Not the fierce ones, the ones that he could use like to kind of bump against with his head, because he was so impacted. His head was so impacted during his birth. Vasco was all about monsters and, aggressive dinosaurs. He also liked monsters, obsessed with monsters, all sorts of kind of mythological creatures. And he was always that child who had very awkward interests, monsters, mythological creatures, anything that really other children weren't really into at that age. And around 2.5 years of age, we moved to London when he was 2, from Portugal to London. We lived there for like 9 years. And at 2.5, he started to ask about the mummies. And I'm like, what's up with the mummies, And I thought, okay, do you want to see mummies? Let's go to the not the Natural History Museum, to the National, what's it called? The museum again? Well, the museum in London where they have the Egyptian collection. So we went there, we took him there, and he was crazy about it. I mean, you can see by the pictures, some of them are kind of blurred, but he was kind of obsessed. When we left, I bought him like a sticker book, like a children's sticker book, and a mask and stuff like that. And forget it. For months, for years, he could only talk about mummies, and he knew all about the story of Tutankhamun. And we're talking about dead people, we're talking about afterlife and dead, mummies and dead people. And he was 3 years old. He was obsessed with that. And for years, he was obsessed with this theme, apart from the monsters. And he learned everything he could about it. We went to the library, and he would bring with him like 10 books of ancient Egypt. It's crazy, And so this was his way of telling us that there was something about these themes of being afraid of scary things chasing him, of scary things, for that matter, that was working inside his inner world, His dreams, I would also always ask him, did you dream today, this night? And he would say yes or no. And what did you dream about? And every single day, almost every single day, I would ask him if he had dreams. And if he had dreams, he would tell me. And the dreams would mostly be about something, a monster chasing him and eating him, or chasing him and not eating him, but being really scary and he being really afraid. And so one of the things that I started doing was telling him that to call me during his dream. When you are there, you call mommy and you tell the monster, wait until you meet my mother, she'll come here and she will help me fight you and you won't get away, something like that. And we would laugh together. And throughout time, things kind of, there were stages. Sometimes he would be okay. He would be kind of calmer with his dreams. Sometimes, mainly during transitions, I found it would be harder for him. Guess why transitions? His transition was really difficult. So mainly during transitions or something that was happening in our lives or in his life, the monsters would chase him again, right? And so yeah, that was this real drive into the monsters. So what didn't add up, because he was such an amazing kid, for me, it didn't add up, like the sensory sensitivities he had. What I'm going to say is actually, depending on the type of experience that you had in your C-section, you can find all of this, some of this. It can show in different ways depending on the coping mechanisms that you found, and also depending on the exact experience you had. So this is not the same for every C-section baby, because it's highly individual and highly dependent on the exact experience. Okay, so I don't want people to think that just being born by C-section will trigger this. This is my experience. This is his experience. And this is his experience from my perspective, because when he's older, maybe he'll come back and say, that's interesting you say that, because this is how I felt it then. It can happen. And so what it didn't add up to me as a mother was the sensory sensitivities. He was very picky. He didn't like whole foods, still happens today. Clothes, like labels or particular textures of clothes, he didn't want it. We need to change it. Shoes, the same thing. Some shoes were no-go. Sandals were no-go. Most of the sandals were no-go. So he had to be precise in terms of the type of clothes and shoes he wanted to use. Reactivity and impulsivity, I already talked about that. But, we had biting in nursery. I had mothers speaking to me directly saying, your child, is biting my child. I'm like, oh my goodness. Every single day I would be called by the teacher to say, we tried to climb here, or he did that, or he bit that child. And I'm like, oh my God. So this was him. I was already expecting something from the nursery every single day, because there's no sensitivity for types of children who are like him. There's no tolerance, there's no patience, there's no curiosity in understanding why children act the way they act. And this was him. And so this constant need for movement also drives adults crazy in nurseries, right? He was always on the go. He climbed to windows. He would, oh my God, he was like a pit of energy. And then he had like really long naps, like 3-hour naps. And you go like, oh my God, okay. So that all that energy has to then, the machine needs to kind of reset in order to keep that same level of energy. So you think about that. It's like a sort of a fable of two speeds. I'm here in one way, but then I crash. Guess where I saw that? I'm right here, and then I crash, right? And it still happens. He's, less because he's older and we've been through a long journey, but sometimes it's kind of in days where he's more active or, hectic. Then he tells me he struggled to sleep. I support that. Then when he's asleep, forget it. Nobody, the house can come down. There can be a storm outside. Everything can happen. And Vasco will not wake up. No matter what you do, believe me, he will not wake up. He still crashes as a rock. And so that was really strange to me. And then, of course, the bumping into things, the clumsiness, that was also due to the vision. But that was something that it didn't make sense to me, because from the pediatrician perspective, everything was fine. no problem whatsoever. Trauma does not cause any of that. Fainting, oh, pretty normal. Bumping into things, and this comes in. Oh, fantastic. He's fine. How can you be fine? Please help me here because I need a little bit more information. And then, of course, these odd interests for a 2-year-old, ancient Egyptian mummies and monsters. Well, monsters a little bit more, but ancient Egyptian mummies and the constant dreams of being eaten by monsters and this anxiety at the time of going to sleep was something that I knew there was something about it that needed to be listened to. So I started paying more attention. But in the meantime, I was also feeling really guilty, really guilty because I thought, is this me? Is this what I bring from behind? What I bring from my own generational baggage? I was pretty anxious mother back then. I was not the person I am today. Definitely not. I knew that. But, I thought maybe it's me. Maybe this is like that because I'm this anxious mother. But then I thought, well, conscious parenting. Okay, what are the scripts? Then I tried to apply all the scripts, and I scripted my interactions with him, kind of thing, and nothing happened. It was not happening what they told it would happen. Oh, depending on how you speak to them, and things are going to change. It didn't, not with him, definitely. And I'm like, oh, there's something here that either I'm doing wrong or I'm missing. And then I started paying more attention, right? There was something else going on. And then we go to early school age. And after this, maybe we stop a little because then I'll go into the birth sequence more specifically into, and then school age, like a little bit further into the therapies, the protocols that we did. And so this boy was fearless. He didn't care. He didn't care, but he was also very much looking for attention all the time. So that duality, he didn't care, but then he had a low self-esteem. You could see his low self-esteem by the constant need for reassurance or to be seen. Guess where that comes from? The need to be seen, the need to be validated, the need for his existence, for his value to be seen and cherished. He is this child still in a totally different extent. So what were we noticing? Definitely fear and anxiety before going to bed. He required my presence to fall asleep, and all sorts of games and funny ways to approach this. He would tell me for months or years, I don't even remember anymore. He would say, Mommy, I want to go to sleep with my glasses. And I would tell him, take your glasses off because it's going to hurt your face. It's like, no, I need to use my glasses. I need to wear my glasses. So he would fall asleep with his glasses. And then I would go back to take his glasses when he was already asleep and put them away. And one day I asked him, why do you want to always go to sleep with your glasses? What's up with that? And he's like, because if I don't wear my glasses, I can't see the monsters,
Yeah.
How can I see my dreams? I can't see my dreams. I can't see the monsters. And I'm like, oh, of course. Okay. Never talked about the glasses anymore. Please go sleep with the glasses. I never want you to not see the monsters. And that was not a conversation anymore because he told me what, why he needed them for. And so then we were also noticing difficulties with interoception. Interoception is one of our senses. We have the 5 we know, right? And then we have 3 more. We have interoception, we have vestibular, and we have proprioception. He had troubles with all these 3 additional senses we never heard about, but they are the first ones before the rest of them. They are very early ones to be developed. Interoception is your sense of what's going on inside your body, Guess what Pitocin does? You just lose track of where you are, of what's going on, of who you are. And that's really shocking for the body, that hammering. So he couldn't tell, for example, if he was hungry, he had to eat. If he was thirsty, he had to drink. If he was sleepy, he told me he was hungry. It was very confusing to me. Can you imagine? Just like, what? You are exhausted. Why? How can you be hungry? And so it was always a thing for us. When he started to go to the toilet, he would get there really late. So sometimes he would have accidents. And I'm like, you have to leave the TV earlier. And then I started to notice, and he's very honest, right? So his reactions would be really feeling the unfairness of what I was saying. Like, that's unfair, that's not true. I go when I feel the need to go, but it was already too late. So I started to notice there was something going on in his body that only registered already too late. I feel the need to go to the toilet, but it's already too late. So that's interoception too. Social and emotional regulation, as I said, body and spatial awareness, I share that as well. And then gross motor and fine motor skills as well, and following simple sequence of tasks. And this, we'll keep this in mind here in brackets, because next I'm going to speak about the birth sequence and the simple sequence of tasks and following tasks or following steps within normal life, like now you do this, then you do that, then you brush your teeth, and then you put your clothes on, and then you go out of the door and you have to brush your hair in between. These kind of simple tasks, C-section babies tend to find them really hard, and I was noticing that already, these following simple sequence of tasks. And so how were we supporting him with what we were noticing? These stories about monsters, Egyptian mummies and dinosaurs and superheroes in the space, because these were his interests. We didn't avoid the stories. He was looking for that. He was telling us, there's something about this that's important to me. So instead of saying, oh, monsters do not exist, we said, let's look at the monsters. Tell me which one is your favorite. Why is this one your favorite? Because it has this and that. What does this monster does? Why do you find it interesting? Because of this, because of that. And in this way, you will know more about what these monsters represent for him, not avoiding to talk about monsters because, oh my God, they're going to hurt their baby. They already did. He's already in the realm of the monsters. There's nothing you can do about it. Either you go along with it and you try to find more about it so that you can metabolize that experience for him and turn it into something else, or you are suppressing it, And so that's what I did. And then he has to fall asleep with his glasses. I told that story already. And then, what if they come, mommy? Well, if they come, mommy will fight them with you. And that turned into eventually him being able to fight the monsters in his dreams on his own. But then this story doesn't end here. This monster story does not end here, because as age goes by, there are stages of development where this implicit memory comes back, and then or what you're seeing, and then you can do something about it. And so maybe I will, okay, sorry, I forgot about this part. And so this is what we call, transition trauma. What happens, these difficulties that we were experiencing, that I was seeing, I didn't know back then, but this was all related to the way he was, his nervous system had registered the experience, and the way the organism had found a way to fight the ordeals, to overcome them, and to adapt. Of course, what it means also, and his sensory system was impacted, and it was all interconnected. What it actually is that it served him to survive as he went through all these milestones. But it's not serving him anymore to adapt to the world he's in right now. But he's programmed to do that. He's programmed to react in that way. But parts of it are not serving him anymore, because they are creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of expectations that the world is actually a bad place. Even though he has these parents who contradict that information, he's programmed for that, to think that, to feel that. And this is so hard to kind of reprogram if you don't know what you're seeing. It's not, I don't believe, and that's not my experience, that gentle parenting, of course, thank God we are gentle parentings and we are conscious about the way we treat our children. But these early experiences are so ingrained in their nervous system. They are so impactful that unless we go there and we know exactly what we're seeing or dealing with, there's always residues that are gonna come back And you won't know what you're seeing unless you go there and investigate, and intentionally think about what might have been for them. I honestly believe that. And so on the sensory side of things and other kind of things that we were using to support him, occupational therapy was a must. Like sensory integration that many C-section babies go through. They leave primitive reflexes retained, and this is massive for general development of the baby. So I would always suggest, somebody when the child is a little bit older to seek an occupational therapist and look for things that you can do. However, many of the protocols that we apply in pre and perinatal psychology, not a coincidence, of course, because it all stems from the same thing, also address sensory integration issues and also address retained reflexes, So books promoting emotional awareness. So this is all things that actually conscious parenting already kind of promotes, like emotional awareness, potty training, maths games that kind of help with potty training, or daily schedules, so that they have a visual of what's now, what's next, what's after. For the sequence I'm going to speak about next, it's really, really important. You have now these kind of wooden boards that are visual, and you have like it's like a stand, a wooden stand, and you have like little squares with the activities. Take a shower and have dinner, have breakfast, and you can put there daily, and they can see, okay, now this, now that, and then that. That expectation of what's going to happen afterwards is really important for children and babies who had, well, more children, because babies don't look at that just yet, who had an interruption of the sequence. That's what a C-section is. It's an interruption of the biological sequence. And that's what's going to turn into the difficulty of following simple, now this, then that. Simple sequences in life, Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. Did you have any question about what I just shared? A lot of information, right?
Yeah, I took some notes. Yeah, actually, I didn't hear about occupational therapy before. Like, I'm not sure what it does or what's the yeah. And many of the things that you mentioned, like, they're in a way I already start to see them in my baby. Like, I have a a C-section story too. And for example, the noting is a big deal for us now. And yeah, we did not get yet to the sequencing, but I'm interested to hear everything that you want to share.
Yeah, the sequence is like well, let's start with the occupational therapy. Occupational therapy is at this age, it addresses the primitive reflexes. So there are many reflexes that are biologically triggered by milestones in development. So during gestation, there are a couple of primitive reflexes that are activated in order to help the organism kind of adapt. And then after birth, they are integrated. They are triggered first, they stay there, and then they are integrated in order to give room, let's say, for the subsequent primitive reflex to take space. I'll give you an example. There's one that's a crawling reflex. All babies are born with a crawling reflex. So if you put a newborn baby on their tummy and you put your hands on the feet without applying much pressure, just a tiny bit, so that they have they feel the limits of your hand, the baby will jump like a froggy, like pretty high jump. I can say that I've done this primitive reflex testing with some newborn babies, and some of them, oh my God, they kind of jump really high and far away, for a newborn baby, that is. Some of them, the primitive reflex is less intense, so you can already see something about the temperament and the coping mechanism of the baby when you test a primitive reflex like crawling when they are newborns. At 3 months of age, this primitive reflex disappears and only comes back in that format, not the primitive reflex. That's what's it's like the how do I say, like the preparation for what it will be needed later on in terms of development for the baby. That crawling reflex is activated until 3 months of age. They won't need crawling around that age, will they? So it stops there, it gets integrated, and then it comes back in the shape of actual crawling around 8-9 months of age, whenever they start crawling, So this is what primitive reflexes are for. They teach the baby, it's a biological ingrained program that teaches the baby about the baby's body and the baby's brain, about milestones that are going to happen later in time. One biggie for us is the startle reflex. The startle reflex is when babies are scared, when they hear an intense sound, a loud sound, and they are scared. If we have a shocking experience, prenatally speaking, during the prenatal life or during birth, depending on what's happening to that baby, like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, I can swear to you that the baby will have a very intense and prolonged and probably non-integrated for a while startle reflex. The baby will be a scared cat, like any kind of loud noise, because he's in alert. The startle reflex serves the baby to learn about the sounds, and then as the baby registers, okay, this sound is familiar, that sound is familiar, that sound is familiar, then the startle reflex start to be integrated, and because the baby knows about the environment already, it doesn't need to be alert to every single sound it hears. It's integrated. I learn about my environment. I'm cool. I don't need this anymore, right? So when I'm afraid, then there's something else in the environment that's different from anything else that makes my red alert go on, When you have shock in the system, you're on high alert. That's why the startle reflex is still there, and many times not integrated because of that. So when I see that in a little older baby, when I say older, it's like 6 months or 9 months or, or 1 year or 2 years sometimes. Sometimes you see very tiny sounds, and a 2-year-old will go, like, if it's, really scared because of that, then okay, this is something, there's something here, and you're curious about that. And so the sequence, going back to the sequence, for this same reason, when there's something really traumatic and shocking, and what we consider to be really traumatic and shocking, it's not the same depending on the moment of development the baby is in. So for a blastocyst, for this blob of cells that just is multiplying now, or just multiplied now, it's very vulnerable, in a stage of great vulnerability. So what happens then, even if it's small for us, it can be really big for a very tiny and vulnerable organism, right? And when you are during the first trimester, you're always more vulnerable, right, than when you are in the second or the third trimester. But we're actually talking about that in class 4 of the online baby therapy course with Carlton. But when you are a perinate is a baby who is going through birth and being born, after being born, is more vulnerable than a second or a third trimester prenate. Why? Because it's going through such a shocking and intense transition of birth, of knowing a constellation, a planet that's so different from what I've known until now. Such an intense transition that whatever happens there, it's more impactful than what happens in the second or third trimester. So your vulnerability, what happens to you depends on the intensity, yes, the event that happens to you, not outside in the outside world, but if you're a prenate, in the inside world as well, but also depends on your vulnerability. If you're more vulnerable, shock gets in faster and gets more ingrained and stays in for a long time and deeper. It's deeper and more difficult to kind of overcome as time goes by, of course.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating. Like all the aspects, all the consequences that every step has. It's mind-blowing.
Right. It makes so much sense to me. And of course, I work with this, but I just, one of the things that I don't understand about society is why are we not curious about this? It's like it didn't happen. It's like we didn't have a past before birth, It's like, we're all playing, closing our eyes to, we say, yes, prenatal life is really important, but then we don't dare to look into how important that is. And why is that? I really don't get it. It's frightening. Maybe it's frightening. It's really frightening to actually see the truth. But honestly, as a person, and I know you are like that as well, and I know many people are like that too. I much rather you tell me what it is and tell me the truth and I'll deal with that, than not tell me the truth as it was happening with Vasco, because maybe you don't know, maybe the world doesn't know, and I don't know what I'm seeing. I'm just lost as a parent. I don't know what to do. I feel it's all on me, and all on me, on what I'm doing right now. Yeah. I know instinctively there are more things that I can be doing, but nobody helps me, So frustrating. Now that after knowing, I'm like, oh man, how unfair, because I could have done this with him much earlier, and I didn't. And this felt really unfair to me. I was angry at the world when I finally found out that my instinct was right, and the professionals who were around me, the pediatricians, should have told me, I don't know much about this, but I know this is a thing. Check it out. That's being humble as a professional, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was not what happened. Yeah, very unfortunate. Yeah, so you want to go back to the presentation?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, all good?
Yeah.
Okay, so then one of the things that I'm going to show you now, whoops, I'm trying to change the slide. Oh, there we go. One of the things that, let me just see if this doesn't start automatically. Probably it will. It was completing the birth sequence, because if this was what he was missing, what he missed on, it's actually going, but then you can see at the same time I'm speaking, then I would help him complete the birth sequence, so he could actually experience these feelings of completion. And at the same time, I was also providing, he was getting the sensory input that he didn't have. And bear in mind that many times, and this is when you are aware to this, you see this. Many times he was the one looking for that input. I wasn't saying, oh, now let's do this activity or this exercise. He was the one looking for this input. In that little the cylinder there, we were in a playground, and he was doing that on his own, so he was wanting that kind of crushed place, like really crushed place, in order to feel his body moving around, And in the second one, where you see him wrapped in a blanket, sometimes I would do this activity with him. Sometimes he would ask me, can you wrap me in a blanket? Or we would use the body sock, which I will share with you in the next slide. And this is basically you wrap him in around his body, and then you say, now you have to reach me, So he needs these movements that he needs to. It replicates, or helps replicate as much as possible, the movements he would have done had he crossed the vaginal canal, you know? This is what babies do. They move like commando crawling, you know? That's what they do. They are in this position, so they need to wiggle and wiggle centimeter by centimeter, millimeters sometimes, in order to cross through the birth canal. But not only that, they have this sensory input of the contractions of the mother's womb that offer that compression in the body. That's why he's wrapped. So the compression and the movement gives him the information and the sensory input he did not have. You know, that's what this does. But in the end, have you noticed that he stopped before crossing my legs? He stopped. And I said, he collapsed there, kind of, you know, it's like, I said, no, carry on, you know, cross my legs, finish the sequence, finish it. Because he gave up before crossing my legs. And when I told him that, he crossed my legs and I celebrated that. Yes, you know, you did it. You made it. You know, you finished the sequence. And he looked at me with that smirky smile of his, you know, saying, yes, I did, you know. And he finished. So this is through repetition as well. Tunnel play, as you see in the first picture, it's massive. With tunnel play, you can notice the patterns. Do they dare to cross the big black tunnel? Do they not dare? Do they dare until halfway and then they want to go back, or they start crying and need your help? Do they do that, but then they stop right when they are coming out? You know, all of this is information that takes you to parts of what got into their system, you know? And it's really interesting to start noticing these patterns, right? But all of this is about giving them what they did not have, right? And then if we move a little bit to a little bit older age, like school age as well, still he was probably I don't know, maybe 8 years old here, 10 years old, 8 probably. This is what he would like to do, get himself into strange, narrow places and being there. Look at him, you know, nobody does that. Only children who need that input do that. My younger son does not do that. Never. He doesn't like being in that position. You know, Vasco loved it. And then the body sock was something, see, from occupational therapy, that was a lifeline for me. When Vasco would go into a spiral of energy and intensity that would drive everybody crazy, himself included, you know, because he couldn't come down, he couldn't self-regulate, I would ask him, do you want to get the body sock? And he would say, yes. He would get into the body sock, he would wiggle inside the body sock, it would offer that compression, but the elasticity for him to feel the limits of his body. He would feel the limits of his body, but he would also bump into things. He would do tunnel, kind of crawling play. You know, he would stick his head inside the body sock completely and just stay there, kind of you know, feeling into the limits of his body. This is massive for babies because when you are born by C-section, imagine being there, you know, inside your mother's womb. You don't feel the contractions, or you do feel the contractions, doesn't matter. They're taking you somewhere, and then you're extracted and you were on your way to somewhere and somebody takes you away to somewhere else, and it's really confusing for a baby. And it's like, it's almost like, where did I begin? Where do I end? Where does my body, where is space? You know, what is like for my body to feel the space now that I'm suddenly out here? Because there was something missing from my own agency in finishing what I started. You know, much worse when you didn't even start it. When babies are planned and they didn't even feel the contractions, where does my body end? Where does it start? You know, how do I relate to the space around me? It must be really awkward for C-section babies to feel that their body's in space. And Vasco tells us that story. When he was inside the body sock, he could feel every single limit of his body. It felt so yummy. And his capacity for self-regulation totally, you know, came down. He was so stable, so kind of relaxed after coming out of the body sock. It was like an immediate remedy. It was like magic. So cool. It was so cool to see. And so we did that, body sock, crashing games. We did a lot of jumping, squeezing, his limits. So the limits of his body would also do, this is proprioception, by the way, feeling the limits of your body. So squeezing the arms in, this is also proprioceptive input. Or bear hugs, this is also proprioceptive input. Or, when you do the, how do you say that? Like the bridge,
Yeah.
But with your hands on your hands and your feet, or just like that with your hands on the floor and your feet just lifting your body and just on all fours, just walking on all fours. That's also proprioceptive input. Or pushing a wall. If you are dysregulated, it works with us too. If you are one day where you're really stressed or anxious and dysregulated, you just press the wall with all your strength. You just press the wall, press the wall, press the wall. And that muscle input that you'll have from pressing the wall will just clear the energy. You feel it. You feel yourself regulating just because of that. That's why exercise works so well. It's not because it's exercise. It's because it also offers vestibular input, proprioceptive input. That's why it's so regulating to do exercises as well. And so, squeeze in tight spaces. He would look for that on his own. And rough and tumble play, all sorts of boisterous kind of play. That's him. Now, relational difficulties, low self-esteem, as I shared, nobody likes me or wants to be my friend. This goes back to the unwantedness of discovery, right? This was something that we still need to coach, but in this age, it was much more intense. The coaching and the support we had to do to do that with him, and how we did it was take the perspective of his friends. Ask what happened. How do you feel? What happened? Was your friend feeling this? What if you had reacted differently? Would that have changed the situation? And more often than not, he would say, yeah, maybe. Okay, so next time you can do this. And eventually he would try different approaches because of this coaching, and things moved around, and his friend reacted differently. So he learned from these attempts in reacting to the world differently, and then he would stick sometimes with his new approaches, sometimes not, and then we would have to coach again, And then this was another area where I was very interested and paying close attention to was his drawings. Not only his dreams, but his drawings. And what you see up there, it was a 6-year-old drawing. He was already trying to kill the monsters, right? In his dreams, the monsters would come to chase him. He would chase the monsters out of his own curiosity. So there were monsters in his inner world that he wanted to get rid of. He wanted to fight these monsters. And these monsters can represent all sorts of things, can represent his experience, can represent the Pitocin, can represent the implantation moment, can represent the discovery, me and dad, can represent the doctors who extract him during the cesarean, can represent people in his life, teachers or whoever, who pressure him in a way he cannot take, pressure due to the Pitocin and to the Caesarean shock, the transition shock. They do not deal well with pressure. They need their time. That's as it is. And so if you understand that this could stem from their birth and their prenatal life, you can be more patient and curious about why they are so reactive to being pressured, right? You have to do this now, instead of, we all do that because we are parents, and sometimes you just have to leave the house because otherwise you're going to be late. But then they will react, and then you'll think, oh, okay, maybe next time I should give him prompts and tell him, in 1 hour, we're going to leave the house. In half an hour, we're going to leave the house. In in 15 minutes, we need to leave the house. In 5 minutes, we're leaving. So they need more prompting so they don't feel so rushed, Same thing with waking up, same thing with going to bed, think about the transitions and what that means for them. They need information. They need to be prepared for that. Rushing and pressure a baby or a child who has been pressured in their very early life is really not the best approach at all, as far as my experience goes. And so what was happening was, at the time of going to bed, this was already school age, but already late. So first drawing from 6-year-old. And last year, he's 12 years old now. Last year, he was still having these hard moments when he went to bed and having this catastrophic thinking of telling me something horrendous and terrible is going to happen tomorrow. So it was not only anxiety at the time of going to bed, it was this catastrophic thinking that would, freak me out, of course, at the time of going to bed. And so I thought, okay, maybe the age is there now. I have the awareness, I have the capacity. The monsters, as you can see, were a little different. But let's do the protocol. Let's destroy the monsters. So I suggest that we did that, if you would like to do that. And he showed himself really curious and interested. And I said, okay, let's look together at the phone and show me the monsters that you see behind the door when you're anxious. And I found this, and I was pretty shocked when he showed me. And I'm like, oh my goodness, he's still trying to find these monsters, and they change throughout time. First it was the dinosaurs, then it was like the Egyptian mummies, then it was like the mythological creatures, and now it's these horrendous creatures that they are still chasing him in his mind, in his heart, in his soul. And it broke my heart. I'm like, yes, let's do something about it. And so I went to the printing shop, and I took like 4 monsters, 3 or 4 monsters. I went to the printing shop. They were pretty shocked to see what I wanted to do. And I asked to print like A4 size monsters. It was crazy, of course. And then I took them home, and I told him, well, I have them. When you're ready, when it's time, we need to be on our own in the house. When you're ready, we can do it. Okay. So one day we were spending the afternoon here together. He didn't have classes in the afternoon, and I was like, "What about today, Vasco? Do you want to do it?" It's like, "Yeah, let's do it." Okay. So I grabbed a box. I glued each monster one at a time to the top of the box, and then I told him to choose a weapon. What weapon would you like to choose? And he chose a weapon. Which I thought, okay, let's do it. I won't share it here because, there are, for liability purposes, of course, because I am a therapist, right? I know my son. I know what the type of exercises I do with my son. They are, of course, in a safe space. I know what I'm doing and all of that. So I don't want it to be kind of spread over and for people to think that this can be done without support, because this would be a protocol with the support of a therapist, which I had. Carlton is our therapist as well. So I had Carlton as my therapist. I am a therapist myself. So I was pretty comfortable in doing that. So he chose a weapon. And just a side note, I did the same exercise with my 5-year-old, and he with his drawings. So he would draw. Just a side note on that, on what I did, because it might be useful regardless of the weapon you choose. It must be age appropriate. It can be kicking. It can be like a piñata, like stick the monster on a piñata and you have a stick and you go for it. It can be, you glue the monster on a plate and you throw it to the wall. It can be all sorts of things depending on your creativity and what's age appropriate, what's safe for the child, and your own relationship to the child and the child's temperament. So it has to be pretty adapted to the situation, right? Pretty specific to the situation. And so he took his weapon and he destroyed each monster at a time into pieces. And at a particular moment in time, we started really, interested in destroying and excited. And then all of a sudden it was like, it was not there. I saw his eyes he was not present in the room with me anymore. He was destroying the monsters. Like his whole body and soul were like disassociated from the present moment. And I saw it in his eyes. He was not present, and he was destroying one at a time, 3 or 4 monsters. And that's the picture you see there. He turned the monsters into pieces, we destroyed them. And then when he was done, he said, okay, mommy, I'm done. I'm fine. I'm finished. Thank you for this. Okay, that's cool. Pretty cool stuff you did here, Congratulations, This was pretty amazing. And I have to say that from that moment on, he never, ever, until today, talked about something terrible is going to happen tomorrow. This anxiety only happens on Sundays, because on Monday it's time to go to school again. The transition, it's time to go to school again. The transition will happen, and he's like, "Mommy, how Sundays are for me. Tomorrow I have school again, and I don't like to. I love the weekend. Don't like to start school again. So how Sundays I need you a little bit more, but only on Sundays." He doesn't say that to me in the rest of the days. It's only on Sundays, and no catastrophic thinking anymore. So this is pretty outstanding. He followed his monsters. I know he will always be interested in strange creatures, in his monsters. I know they still live inside of him, but he does not need to live them. They can live inside of him.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of who he is. It's part of his experience, but there's no need to have to be a split that the monsters will chase him and eat everyone around him. No, now they're more integrated than I think than ever. It's not that he's destroying, like getting rid of them. It's kind of actually saying, I don't need you to chase me anymore, because now I have the agency to destroy you when I need to destroy you. I think it's more the way I see it. And anyway, with time, he'll learn what integration is. It doesn't have age to integrate good and bad. He starts to do that now at age 12. He's already, differentiating between what I experience. It's not who I am. Because that's what happens when you're young. As you're growing up, what we experience, we take it as who we are. If I'm not wanted at my discovery, I must be bad. I must have something really undesirable about myself. I must have a monster inside of me who is disliked, And so he could destroy his monsters and have agency. And how powerful is that? I can destroy my monsters. Oh my goodness, And we did that together, which is even more amazing. We did that together in togetherness, in the relational field. Our relationship changed also because of that. I think it got us closer. There was a lot of intensity from him towards me in particular times of our family life, and it kind of cooled down. It eased because he could destroy the monsters. I think I was one of them at a particular stage in his life. Of course, he was inside of me, and I don't mind. I recognize that I could have been one of them. And we did it together. We destroyed them together. Now it's still going to be here to help him fight the rest of his monsters if they come, right? And then this was all about the transition trauma protocol that we did, and then bridging the sequence, other than the games that I mentioned, which, of course, now he's 12 years old. He doesn't want to go inside a body sock anymore. And, sometimes he does crawl and does this exercise, but he's at a different stage now, which needs to be approached in a different way as well. So, for example, if I would say, Vasco, you need to wake up, put your clothes on, have breakfast, put your clothes on, put your shoes on, and brush your teeth, and pack your bag. 6 stages in the sequence. Forget it, not going to happen. So it needs coaching. It needs me to tell him, okay, starting with 2 things at a time, then 3 things at a time. And every step of the way, I pull him when I see him drifting. So he does one, and then he sees something on the table, and he's like, "Oh, this is really interesting. It has nothing to do with what I was doing, but I forgot already about what I was doing because I lost track, of what I was doing." So he needs a reminder. Vasco, just stay with a sequence. Finish until you're finished. Only finish until it's done. Don't give up, because your brain is playing tricks on you. He's trying to trick you. He's trying to tell you can't do the sequence altogether, but you can. And if you notice that you are drifting, you can go back to the task you're doing. So first start with 2, then start with 3, always paying attention and getting him back on track if you see him drifting and losing track and being extracted from the Cezarian somewhere else. You bring him back to the sequence and you help him finish the sequence, And of course, with time, it needs time and repetition. And when you see it again, even today, he was doing something, and then suddenly he looked, I don't know, somewhere else. And I said, "See what's happening? You're losing track. Come back, come back. What were you doing? Packing the bag. Okay, finish packing the bag. Cool." That's that. With time, he will do it on his own without the constant interruptions. And so yeah, a little bit what I just said, but the most important thing is to recognize the experience, as I said. If you don't see what's happening, you can't support. That's as simple as that. If you aren't aware, you can't support. And the truth is that what I say here, being rescued at birth, organizes towards self-doubt and difficulty in completing tasks, right? So if you never experience finishing something, you need to be able or given the opportunity to actually feel how that feels like. It's not only when you get to university how it feels to finish a project, or finish or start, develop and finish a project, It starts today. It can start today, so that when you get to university, it doesn't feel as hard, So it's all about predictability, knowing what you're seeing, helping them predict what's going to happen next and see that sequence more clearly. And you see here my Lego, what I was talking about, the daily tasks, I built one myself with Lego, very clumsy, but it worked pretty well. And I had like Monday, Tuesday, days of the week. And then I did one for a Lego club, and the other one, I can't even read. What was it? Football, maybe? No. Oh no, I know. Packed lunch. One of the days it was packed lunch. So he knew, okay, on Friday I have Lego club and I have packed lunch. He knew what to expect. And then building agency and power, this power, using not only situations where you give the choice, you make them believe sometimes that they are choosing. Sometimes they are not, but as an adult, you can provide 2 options that are okay with you, and that gives them agency when actually you are navigating, you are choosing for them. But that doesn't matter, right? They need to feel they have the agency. They need to feel they are the ones doing it. They have the choice. Then provide the sensory input. If you bridge the sequence, you help them overcome what they could not or was difficult to overcome, or you give them what they didn't have by closing the sequence, by bridging the sequence they missed, at the same time as you provide the sensory input that they also either missed or had too much, and that made the primitive reflexes work in a different way in their bodies. Then you are addressing 2 things in one, And then the play. For me, one of the most changing transformation is the capacity of just being with them and observing what they're doing, what they're drawing, what they're dreaming about, the way they move, the play they choose to play, the type of friends they choose to play with, the way they navigate a playground. How do they do? Are they on their own? Do they interact with other children? What does that tell you about the child you have? What does that tell you about the way they are coping with that environment, with the people who are there at that moment in time, what does that tell you if you compare it, or if you layer it on top of what you already know about their prenatal life, what you already know about their birth? Are there patterns that you can identify? It's massive, because children communicate babies through their baby body language. Of course, that's what we do. We have these signs, but then they tell us things through the way they look at it, the way they play, through all these ways that they choose to interact with the outside world, So, yeah, let them win. Offer challenges adapted to the child's coping mechanism. And tolerance threshold is of course respecting what you observe your child to be, and respond to the child's behavior using the child's language and considering the child's temperamental coping mechanism and the experience they had, And so I will show you then, lastly, I'm just finishing now. This was one of Vasco's favorite books. It still is. It's from Maya Angelou, it's a poem from Maya Angelou. And it reads these 2 pages: shadows on the wall, noises down the hall. Life doesn't frighten me at all, because it has,
Wow.
Life itself has been so frightening for him. And reading this now, after being curious about all his life until now, it just says so much more than just a child who's interested in a random scary book, right?
Yeah.
It just says so much about who he is, what he's been through, how he's overcome it. He's a hero. He's like fantastic the way he has survived all these ordeals, and he still is the amazing, the amazing child he is. He loves his friends, he loves his football, he still loves his book. He's still probably going to fight his monsters now and then as life goes on, but he does know that whenever he needs us, we will be there to fight his monsters with him, and that's the most important of it all, his resilience and the fact that he knows that will back him up no matter what. We see these monsters too. It's not only we'll back him up in all the needs he has, but we see more. We see beyond, beyond that, and he knows that. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you for listening to the presentation. Let me stop sharing, because you might have some questions for me.
Yeah, first of all, like I'm so impressed, and I want to congratulate you for the amazing journey. Like almost, I cannot believe that it is possible, and it is possible to have so much wisdom and understanding and empathy and love, and to actually do all these things. And I just like I'm also a bit sad because I know that most of the people that fight their monsters, especially children, babies, with this yeah, with this start in life, like they don't have the understanding, they don't have the support, and it's just yeah, it's amazing, and yeah, I love to to share it with as many people as possible. So yeah, something can
One
be.
thing that kind of I always think about this work, and of course, my mind is always thinking about it in a way. It's like how we can't even think that our babies go through that. It's so hard to think about that and not knowing what to do about that. That you split. You prefer not even thinking that that is a possibility, because if you do, then you feel guilty, and it's hard to overcome guilt. And we talked a lot about guilt, and I love to talk about guilt because I think it's really useful feeling, guilt. And I think this is the reason why guilt exists. It's to knock on our door, and say, that thing that you're avoiding to look at, that's the thing you need to look at, And we idealize babies and babies' experiences, and it's very kind of incoherent in a way, because in one way we are saying babies won't remember, they don't have an emotional life, so why bothering about it? And then at the same time, we idealize babies. Oh, babies are, sacred beings and nothing ever happened to them. It's like a double, or maybe it's not incoherent. Maybe it's part of the same, right? I'm saying incoherent, but it's part of the same, saying that nothing can ever happen to babies and saying they won't remember. Maybe it's part of the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
split, not wanting to look at it. And it just really surprises me why it's not obvious that babies bring with them the human qualities of imperfection, in the sense of not being
Yeah,
idealized,
yeah.
the qualities of what a human being actually brings, which is the good, which is the bad, which is the resilience and the capacity to survive, but it's the frustration and the difficulties and holding that memory of the difficulty of having to survive, right? And it's so hard when you cannot hold, if you cannot hold that for yourself, that you have both a good and a bad in comments, because the bad, I don't think it's bad in the sense of you're a horrendous person and we all have the horrendous part of ourselves. It's not bad in that way. It's the part of ourselves that we don't dare to see because we don't acknowledge it for ourselves to be good or to be good enough. We are not proud of that part of ourselves. It's not bad because it's nasty or toxic for the world or for our people. It's bad because we aren't proud of that. When we don't have the split and we have a more integrated way, we can also be more honest parents, and we don't need to follow the scripts. Yes, sometimes I lose my mind, and sometimes I'm stressed and I speak a little bit louder, lose my mind in that sense, I speak a little bit louder, but I think, oh, shit, I didn't want to do that. And I can go back and say, guys, I'm sorry, mommy, is having her period or whatever that is, I'm all over the place. I'm really stressed and I shouldn't have speak to you like that. And that gives them an example of what actually is integration. It's, yes, sometimes we can do things that we're not proud of, but we can go back and say sorry, instead of idealizing the parents we are and always being the good parent, the side of the good parent, we're always the good parent with a good parent. We never have bad parts in us, we don't know. Is this who we want our children to become? To idealize what it means to be human? Because being human is being imperfect, is making mistakes. And honoring those mistakes is also part of being human and integrated and developed and mature, and emotionally developed human, is to be able to make mistakes, go back and say sorry and repair. And if you role model that for them, and if you say, yeah, it's okay to have your monsters, it's part of who you are, but that does not define you. It's just what you have experienced, you have inside of you, but that's not who you are. You are bits of so many different things. That differentiation for us and for our children is really cool. It's really important, like, to tell them that they can be imperfect, they can say sorry, they can make mistakes, and that will never jeopardize the love we have for them. Never risk it. But imperfection is part of the package of being human, Unfortunately, I wish it was not, but that's the shape we're in right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So wonderful. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I just hope like more people can learn or be curious about it at least. And yeah, maybe this way they can change the experience of the babies. And now I guess we're gonna wrap up. Um, if someone who's listening like is interested to learn more, to hear more, to maybe work with you, um, where they can find all this information and yourself.
Yeah. So right now, where I am more active and I'm working more closely is KTBT, Carlton Terry Baby Therapy. That's I'm a partner of Carlton within Carlton Terry Baby Therapy. So everything you see there is it's being done by our team, which is Carlton and I and Hannah, who is a recent amazing addition to our team. She's also a baby therapist, an amazing one, and so that's where you can find a lot of information about baby therapy and about pre and perinatal psychology. Follow our Instagram, KT Baby Therapy. I also have my own Instagram. It's The Holding Mother, and my website. There you can find a little bit more about myself and some of what I've been posting in the past, which is not super like updated right now because I'm more working on KTBT's Instagram page. But either one or the other, you'll find useful information about pre and perinatal psychology and what you can do. And of course, if you want to start, I'm always available, for a first kind of interview to see, what you're looking for, what your birth story and pregnancy, prenatal story has been. And from then on, it really depends on what every family is looking for. And the type of work we can do will always depend on what happened, and explore the exact story that happened for the baby, for the parent, and then explore it or be curious about the perspective of the baby, what might have been for the baby, and then go to the specifics of each milestone I refer to in this chat we're having, and look at the baby body language through videos, because babies tell us all sorts of things through their body language, and we can identify this through the baby's body movements and the places they touch on their bodies, the faces they make, the prosody of their faces and the expressions they make. And so we can explore so much more than only listening to the story just by watching the babies.
Is this also available for the adults? Let's say a baby became an adult.
Of course. We're talking about my main body of work is with babies, but I also work with parents. Sometimes I work with parents many times within the therapy of the baby, because as I said, working with the relational field is really important. So sometimes if the mother or the father need a individual session within the baby's process for them to work through some things, that is done through the baby's process. Other times, yes, I work with adults. Mainly with the adults, the process is a little bit different, but I do ask for babies' pictures in order to do a birth mask. That's another technique that we do at KTBT, where we do drawings on the baby's face when you were a baby. I take the pictures, we draw the lines that offer a picture of where you during birth suffered more compressions from the contractions and from the pelvis of your mother, because that gives us a sort of a guide into what birth might have been like for you. And then I use meditative practices to go deeper into a particular imprint. That's how I work, particular with adults. So yeah, definitely able to do that with adults as well. And it's, as you start to excavate and explore the birth story, the pregnancy story, and then you do some meditations around particular imprints, more often than not, it matches. What you're feeling here, it matches what kind of the potential imprints might have been from birth. It kind of, and also when you explore the relational field, your relational field, say your mother, father, where you come from, and then we see the patterns from the relational field with you, then you see the birth, you see the prenatal story, you see your childhood, and then we meditate over some of these particular stages, and the picture starts to come together. It's so beautiful. It's really beautiful to see, because it also taps into the relation you are establishing with if you have children already, it kind of taps into the relationship you are establishing with your children as well. So it kind of makes sense to explore that and then explore your baby's experience, because there's often a match.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think we could talk for weeks
I
on
know,
that
I
one.
talk about this like for days on end. I know.
Well, thank you so much for your time and this interview. And yeah, we'll maybe see each other soon on another one or something like that.
See each other soon. Yeah, I'm so happy to have been invited. So, honored. It's amazing, and congratulations for the project. I think it's like we need more and more and more, podcasts like this and pages like yours and YouTube channels that talk about, the things that in the mainstream world we don't hear about these things. And babies are missing, as you said. Babies are missing on this support. Parents are missing on this support, and we do the best we can to promote it, but yeah, the mainstream world pushes on we feel there's a lot of a backlash from the mainstream world into different practices than they are used to, and parents sometimes question if it's a path to go. Usually you only go into that as an adult. You go into that if you have been into this kind of therapy, if you have been through talking therapy and many other therapies, and you still feel there's something else here that it's not being addressed, and then you try it and you feel, oh my God, there's something here that I didn't know, and it's so amazing. You feel immediately different. And then with the babies, it's like when you are absolutely sure that there's no way that experience could not have impacted your baby. Like, it's impossible. When you are the person who's already aware to that, then there's something about when you read about pre and perinatal psychology, when you hear about baby therapy, that it's a yes. Your body says, yes, this makes so much sense. This is it, or this is part of it. And so hopefully that's what many more people will hear with your YouTube channel. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.